Minister Marta. It is a great pleasure for us at the University of Helsinki to be here. And we will have first speech by Minister Marta, and then Marianne Jaula will give a comment. Margot Wallström, current Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs, has served as Vice President for the European Commission. She has had two posts as a commissioner. She has been a member of the Swedish Parliament, and most importantly for the topic of today's speech, she was the first ever special representative of the UN Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict. Minister Wallström has also been chair of the Council of Women World Leaders Ministerial Initiative, among other achievements. And Marianne Jaula is a researcher at the University of Helsinki. Her special area is political violence and gendered politics. She has done extensive research in Aceh, Indonesia. But without any further explanations, I will give the floor to Mr. Wallström, please.
Highlights the increase in gender-based and sexual violence against women. Many women are forced to live in public places, such as in train stations, where some of them are being abused of men in uniform participating in the war. 27, that is the number of times that the word rape is mentioned in the latest report to the UN from the Independent International Commission of Inquiry in the Syrian Arab Republic. And this report describes crimes committed both by the government forces and ISIL. And regarding ISIL, it says the following. Information collected recently indicates that groups of dozens of girls and women have been transported to various locations in Syria. There, the girls and women are raped and held in sexual slavery. I'm here to talk to you about why Sweden is the first country to declare that we will pursue a feminist foreign policy. And given these two examples, I hope it is obvious why we must include 100% of the population also when we face war and conflict. And why conflict-related sexual violence is a matter of peace and security, not exclusively a women's issue. I'm honored to address you at this prestigious research institution, and I would like to thank also the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, the University of Helsinki, and also the Finnish Institute of International Affairs for hosting us. Thank you, Professor Lax, also for your introductory comments, and I'm looking forward to discussion with all of you, Dr. Jaula, also, and you students. This year I understand that the university will celebrate 375 years of learning and intellectual endeavor, and it is a very fitting place to highlight one of the most acute challenges facing us today, how to effectively combat persistent and in many places growing human rights violations against women and girls. I've divided my talk into three parts. First, I would like to set the agenda and discuss also the need for gender analysis in international politics. I will then describe the concept of a feminist foreign policy, and also I will talk about the areas where we can achieve real change. Gender analysis is as complex as it is crucial. It entails, of course, mapping, understanding, and ultimately transforming norms, power structures, and gender relations. Traditional and very narrow concepts of security still dominate the global agenda. And as we mentioned several times, the concept of having a feminist foreign policy introduced a kind of giggling factor to begin with. But I think it has already stopped, and I'll explain why. There is a clear gap between what people in conflict zones experience, not least women, and also the high-level discussions in the UN and elsewhere. And it has been adequately captured by Leymah Gbowee, the Liberian Nobel Peace Prize winner, in her book, Made to Be Our Powers, How Sisterhood, Prayer and Sex Changed a Nation at War. I can also recommend the movie Pray the Devil Back to Hell, where Leymah Gbowee appears as the naturally born general of all the people you could see on that movie. Gbowee speaks about the multitude of sensitivities and risks of discrimination surrounding international peace-building efforts and the challenges of ensuring inclusive processes. She writes in her book, "You cannot go to another country and make a plan for it. The cultural context is so different from what you know that you will not understand much of what you see. People who have lived through a terrible conflict may be hungry and desperate, but they are not stupid. They often have very good ideas about how peace can evolve, and they need to be asked. That includes women, most especially women. To outsiders like the UN, these soldiers see a problem to be managed, but they were our children." The history of women and girls in war and conflict is one of silent suffering in the face of overwhelming insecurity. And this is true also after peace agreements have been signed by men in most cases, even bad men forgiving other bad men in fancy hotels, as one NGO described it, challenging the very definitions of peace and security. It is often through personal biographies and fiction that we gain knowledge about massive violations against women in war and conflict zones. And there are many eye-opening accounts. One of the most exceptional writers of her generation, Sophie Oksanen, has in painfully effective way described the extreme vulnerabilities of women in the face of conflict, and also their limited choices in structures defined and controlled by men. Even today, when the unspeakable horrors of the Holocaust have been mapped out, we still have scant knowledge of the sexual violence that Jewish and other women were subjected to. And the record from the Nuremberg trials comprises 42 volumes. Not one heading in these 42 volumes includes the word rape, prostitution, or women. Impunity has reigned supreme for these crimes for too long. There was a huge and very welcome shift that took place in the 90s, notably through the Rwanda and Yugoslavia tribunals, and later also the ICC, the International Criminal Court, recognizing sexual violence as a war crime under international humanitarian law. Enormous academic and political efforts have paved the way for progress since, and Finland's contributions in this regard has been as outstanding as they have been crucial. And hopefully many of you in this room will also carry that tradition forward. Today, women in Syria, Iraq, and Ukraine are under siege, in sexual slavery, or in a train station. Today, these crimes may have a name, but the road to justice still remains long and an uncertain one. When we travel down that road, we must remember that women are not only victims or survivors. Most importantly, they are strong actors for change in their societies. And I remember very vividly a visit to the DRC, an Eastern DRC in 2010. And we were sitting in a small room in a salle d'écoute, and that is through an international NGO, a place where women and girls could come and just give there to talk to for example, people from the International Bar Association or the American Bar Association, where lawyers voluntarily would help these women to hopefully find some kind of justice. But first and foremost, it was a matter of listening to their stories. And this time Joyce was there, and she was, I think, 15, and she was accompanied by her father. And the whole time, she looked down with her back bent, with her hands under her knees, sitting bent down on her chair, very silent. And it was her father that told her story, that she had been on her way from school with her best friend on this dirty village, dirt road in the middle of the village. And then a jeep with a few soldiers stopped and they asked her or commanded her to buy cigarettes for them. And of course they could not say no, so she went and bought cigarettes, and when she came back with the cigarettes, they just picked her up and took her on the truck and went away. And she could not even today tell exactly what happened to her, but she was kept in the basement of the house for several days. And she was totally traumatized. And the thing is that her father described what a promising student she was. She was the first in the family who actually had been going to school, that she was the best in her class, that she was looking forward to having scholarships, and she was an outstanding, intelligent girl. And he had put all his hopes to her and to her future. And this was destroyed. Over these days, that was completely destroyed. And not only the stigma, the marginalization that these girls are subject to, but also the shame that he felt on the family. But he had decided that he would rise to that he would help her to hopefully find justice in one way or the other. And I think we should just keep Joyce in memory. It was unusual also because it was the father in this case that would come with his daughter and really stand up for her. In most cases, it is the women who also have to defend themselves or their girls. But in this case, he said, enough is enough, and we just have to make sure that we create the future for our country, and it will not go through more of rapes and sexual violence and violence and war. So what can we do then? What can a feminist foreign policy do? Our feminist foreign policy aims at ensuring women's rights and participation in central decision-making processes, including in peace-building efforts and peace negotiations. Gender equality is not just the right thing to do, it is the necessary thing to do if we want to achieve our wider security and foreign policy objectives. Feminist foreign policy will also be an integral part of activities throughout our Swedish Foreign Service, and our methodology can be summarized, I think, in 4 words, all beginning with the letter R. And the first is, of course, a reality check, getting the facts right from the outset. What is the situation on the ground if we want to include 100% of the population? The second R is rights. The simple fact that human rights are also women's rights. And 2 fundamental tracks must be followed when pursuing a feminist foreign policy. The first is probably prohibition, such as gender-based discrimination, forced marriages, female genital mutilation. Secondly, where the aim is for progress, equal rights to inheritance and access to education and health, including sexual and reproductive health and rights. And these both tracks are key to women's empowerment. The third R stands for resources, and that refers to Sweden's ambitious international work, for example, in development. And the most basic starting point here is the need to apply a gender perspective when distributing aid and resources. And sometimes I take one of the most simple and naive of all examples. I mentioned that they were building a road a bridge somewhere in one of the countries where we have development, where we use a lot of development resources. And then our staff said, well, how on earth can you apply a gender lens building a bridge? How would that be done? Well, simply because if you ask the women, they would say, well, you have built a bridge that is for motor vehicles only, for cars. But most women do not have cars here. Most women have to walk or use a bike, but you have not even built a lane for those that walk or use a bike. So it can be very simple as that, if you look at it with a gender lens on. The fourth R has to do with representation, and that includes, of course, influence over agenda setting. And it starts by asking a simple question: who conducts foreign policy at all levels? And who is at the table? Today, actually, at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, all the 4 top positions, 2 ministers and 2 state secretaries, are all women. A feminist foreign policy will also require unwavering leadership and commitment at the highest political level. I'm happy to see how my Prime Minister, and of course I have met with my counterpart, with my colleague, Titomioja, so many times that I also know that he never misses out to sign up to also documents and demands for women, for a clearer and better role for women in all contexts. And we would like to work even more closely with Finland to push forward at the global level. I'm convinced that the Nordic countries have experiences to share, and we have set a global example of how ensuring women's rights have benefited both women and men and our societies at large. Step by step, parental leave by parental leave, pushing forward in all areas, we've started to transform norms and values. So how can we achieve real change? Well, I think we need to discuss what does it mean practically on the ground. So let us return to the situation in case in Ukraine. Women represent the largest group of internally displaced persons in Ukraine, and a large number of women, exact numbers are unknown, remain in the conflict zone. A recent visit to eastern Ukraine brought to light that women were more or less invisible in the humanitarian work and in the reporting of the conflict. You might have to ask if there are maybe war crimes committed also against women. Some of them so traumatized that they won't even tell you their story or what has happened to them. No disaggregated data was available. Overall, very few of the international humanitarian organizations on the ground had considered the different needs of women, girls, boys, and men. And as I've already mentioned, there were several testimonies to the increased risks of sexual and gender-based violence and also trafficking. So building competence and capacity in humanitarian and military structures is paramount to address these shortcomings. And we might have to ask maybe the Ukrainian government, do you need more of gender advisors to help you also to build knowledge and to assist you in thinking about what to do next? 14, or now it's 15 years ago already, UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security was adopted. And it was for the first time that the different roles of men and women was acknowledged, was described and in situations of both war and peace, and also establishing prevention, protection, participation as central concepts. And without a doubt, 1325 has impacted global policies and also forced these issues onto the global agenda. But it has so far failed to bring about real transformative changes in how we operate with regard to gender in peace building and peacekeeping. In some cases, national action plans under 1325 have proved to be potentially important vehicles for this to happen, but ultimately what it takes is, of course, political will. And no matter how many documents we sign, if the will to act is not there, we will not move forward. Only 46 member states, not even all EU member states, have adopted national action plans following Resolution 1325, and this is way too few. Even when national action plans have been adopted, too little concrete action has been taken, and accountability mechanisms are clearly too weak and have to be given more consideration. Together with Finland and Denmark, Sweden has proposed to establish a high-level position in the European External Action Service responsible for promoting gender equality and ensuring effective implementation of Resolution 1325. I mean, NATO already has one. And 1325, or an ambassador for these issues, or a special representative. The African Union has one. But still the European Union is lagging behind. And we believe that such a function would be instrumental in strengthening the EU's gender approach to peace and security. Over the past years, only 8% of the mediators in UN-led peace processes have been women, and I think if you look at over a longer period of time, 3% of all signatories to peace deals or peace agreements have been women. So women are not there at the table also agreeing on peace or the future. And of all the peace treaties signed between 2011 and 2012, only 20% contained language on women's security at all. So security for whom? And therefore Sweden is preparing an initiative to support a network of women mediators, and I think this would be best organized in a Nordic way again, that we work together. I don't want to hear anymore the argument that there are no women. We can't find any women as mediators or negotiators. So, dear friends, feminist foreign policy aims to respond to one of the greatest challenges of this century, the continued violations of women's and girls' human rights in time of peace and in conflict. Failing to do so will ultimately undermine our overarching foreign policy and security objectives. It will be so much more difficult to reach to a sustainable peace or to come back to an economic development in any country if we simply ignore half of the country's population. 15 years into the 21st century, the world is torn by conflicts that are more complex and more difficult to solve than ever before. And today, 1 billion people live in fragile states and conflict zones, placing far-reaching demands on international peacekeeping and crisis management. International actors are under pressure to adapt, moving towards the protection of civilians rather than observing ceasefires. Applying routine gender analysis, strengthening the collection of gender disaggregated data, improving accountability, and bringing women into peace negotiations and peace building will be key in moving forward. So when doing so, we can remember what Swedish author Elin Wagner said when she compared values and ideals to old-fashioned bicycle lights. She said they don't light up until you pedal forward. And in our work for gender equality, Sweden and Finland can do a great deal together, and I'm confident that many of you in this room also will help us when we pedal forward. Thank you for listening.